I stared at the email on Greg's computer, my heart pounding in my chest. The words on the screen seemed to blur together, but one phrase stood out like a neon sign: financial deceit. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the exchange between Greg and his sister, Lydia. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "Greg," I called out, my voice wavering. "Can you come here for a minute?" He appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong, Char?" I swiveled the laptop towards him, the incriminating email displayed prominently. "Care to explain this?" Greg's face paled as he scanned the contents. "It's not what you think," he stammered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This is for the family." I let out a bitter laugh. "For the family? Or for Lydia's latest scheme?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "How could you do this behind my back, Greg? After everything we've built together?" He held up his hands defensively. "Char, you know how Lydia gets. She was in a tight spot, and I couldn't just turn my back on her." "So you decided to betray my trust instead?" I shook my head, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes. "How much did you give her this time?" Greg averted his gaze, his jaw clenched. 70,000. The air seemed to leave my lungs. $70,000, our hard-earned savings, meant for our future and our daughter Ellie's education. All funneled into Lydia's bottomless pit of financial irresponsibility. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Ellie's voice startled me, and I turned to see her standing in the hallway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. At 20 years old, she was wise beyond her years, and I could see the concern etched on her face. "It's nothing, honey," Greg said, forcing a smile. "Just a little family misunderstanding." I opened my mouth to protest, but the doorbell rang, cutting me off. Greg shot me a warning look before heading to answer it. Moments later, Lydia breezed into the room, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the turmoil she was causing. "Charlotte, darling," she exclaimed, air-kissing my cheek. "I'm so glad you're both here. We have a bit of a situation." I tensed, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "You don't say." Lydia's gaze flickered between Greg and me, her perfectly painted lips curling into a smirk. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is a family matter, after all." As she launched into her latest sob story, I felt a surge of determination rise within me. I had been complacent for too long, allowing Greg and Lydia's manipulations to dictate the course of our lives. But not anymore. This time, I would stand my ground and protect what mattered most, my family's future and my own sense of self-worth. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. Lydia's words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, seeping into every corner of the room. "This is for Greg's future, too," she insisted, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the arm of the sofa. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Of course, she would try to spin this as some noble act, a sacrifice for the greater good of the family. But I knew better. This was just another one of her schemes, and Greg had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. "Stop with the lies, Lydia," I said, my voice low and steady. "I know about the emails, the money." Ellie shifted uncomfortably beside me, her gaze darting between Greg and me. I could see the confusion and hurt etched on her face, and my heart ached for her. She didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of this mess. Greg cleared his throat, his eyes pleading with me to let it go. "Char, let's not do this in front of Ellie." "No," I said firmly. "She deserves to know the truth." I turned to my daughter, taking her hand in mine. "Your father has been funneling money from our joint savings account to cover Lydia's gambling debts." Ellie's eyes widened, and she looked at Greg in disbelief. "Is this true?" Greg opened his mouth, but Lydia cut him off. "It's not as simple as that, Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I made some poor choices, yes, but your father was only trying to help me get back on my feet." I scoffed. "By taking $70,000 from our family's future? Without even consulting me?" Lydia waved a dismissive hand. Details. The important thing is that we're family, and family looks out for each other." I could feel my blood boiling, my carefully cultivated composure cracking. "Family doesn't manipulate and lie to each other," I spat. "Family doesn't betray each other's trust for their own selfish gain." Greg flinched at my words, but Lydia remained unfazed. "You're being dramatic, Charlotte," she said, her lips curling into a condescending smile. Greg was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing, I echoed, my voice rising. The right thing would have been to come clean with me from the start. The right thing would have been to let you face the consequences of your actions instead of enabling you. Lydia's eyes narrowed, and for a moment her mask of false concern slipped, revealing the entitled, manipulative woman beneath. "You're one to talk about consequences," she hissed. "You've been living a life of luxury off Greg's hard work for years." I recoiled as if she had slapped me. "How dare you?" I sputtered. "I've been the one holding this family together, working my ass off to provide for us, while Greg was off chasing get-rich-quick schemes with you." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Greg looked stricken, his face ashen, while Ellie stared at her father with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. Lydia, however, simply shrugged. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, dear sister-in-law," she said, rising to her feet. "Just remember, blood is thicker than water, and you'll need us more than you think." With that parting shot, she sauntered out of the room, leaving a trail of tension and betrayal in her wake. I sank back onto the couch, suddenly drained. Greg reached out to me, but I flinched away from his touch. "Char, please," he pleaded. "Let me explain." But I had heard enough explanations, enough excuses. The truth was laid bare before me, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. My husband, the man I had trusted with my heart and my future, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And as I looked into Ellie's eyes, brimming with unshed tears, I knew that I couldn't let this stand. It was time to take control of my life, to protect what mattered most. The gloves were off, and I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine, with or without Greg by my side. The silence that followed Lydia's departure was deafening, the weight of her parting words hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the anger and hurt swirling within me, threatening to boil over. "How could you betray our trust like this, Greg?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Our future? Ellie's future?" Greg ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's complicated, Char," he said, his tone pleading. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." I let out a bitter laugh. "The pressure? From your manipulative sister, you mean?" I shook my head in disbelief. "That's no excuse, Greg. We're supposed to be partners, a team. But instead, you've been lying to me, stealing from our family's future to enable Lydia's reckless behavior." Ellie shifted uncomfortably beside me, her eyes downcast. I could only imagine the turmoil she must be feeling, caught in the crossfire of her parents' crumbling marriage. Greg's gaze flickered to our daughter, and I could see the guilt etched on his face. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice strained. "Lydia just kept needing more and more, and I couldn't turn my back on her. She's family." "And what am I, Greg?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Just some inconvenient obstacle in your twisted idea of family loyalty?" He flinched at my words, but I pressed on, the dam of emotions finally bursting forth. "I've been the one holding this family together, working my ass off to provide for us while you were off chasing get-rich-quick schemes with Lydia. And this is how you repay me? By betraying my trust, jeopardizing our daughter's future?" Greg opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm done with the excuses, the lies. You've made your choice, Greg, and it's clear where your loyalties lie." I turned to Ellie, my heart aching at the sight of her distress. "Honey, I'm so sorry you've been caught up in this mess," I said, taking her hand in mine. "But I promise you I'm going to make things right, no matter what it takes." Ellie nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I trust you." Those simple words were like a balm to my wounded soul, reminding me of what truly mattered, the love and trust of my daughter, the one person who had stood by me through it all. I squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her unwavering support. Then I turned back to Greg, my resolve hardening like steel. "You have one chance to come clean, Greg," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Tell me everything, every scheme, every lie, every penny you've funneled to Lydia, and maybe, just maybe, we can start to rebuild some semblance of trust." Greg's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of hope in his gaze. But then his expression hardened, and he shook his head. "I can't," he said, his voice barely audible. "Lydia, she needs me." In that moment, I knew our marriage was well and truly over. The man I had loved, the partner I had trusted, was gone, replaced by a shell of a person, trapped in Lydia's web of manipulation and deceit. But as I looked at Ellie, her hands still clasped in mine, I knew that I had to be strong, for her sake and for my own. The storm was brewing, and I was ready to weather it, no matter the cost. I stared at the computer screen, my eyes burning from the countless hours spent poring over financial records and email trails. The evidence was damning, a twisted web of deceit spun by Greg and Lydia that threatened to unravel everything I had worked so hard to build. A soft knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called out, quickly minimizing the windows on my screen. Mariana, my trusted colleague and mentor, stepped into the office, her warm smile a welcome respite from the storm raging within me. "Charlotte, you look like you could use a break," she said, her voice laced with concern. I let out a weary sigh, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "I'm fine, Mariana, just trying to make sense of this mess." Her brow furrowed as she took in my haggard appearance. "This is about more than work, isn't it?" she asked gently. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. But Mariana had been a constant source of wisdom and support throughout my career, and I knew I could trust her. "It's Greg," I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He's been funneling money to his sister, Lydia, behind my back. Thousands of dollars, gone, just to enable her reckless behavior." Mariana's eyes widened, and she sank into the chair across from me. "Oh, Charlotte," she murmured, her voice heavy with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." I shook my head, blinking back tears of frustration. "I've just been so blind, Mariana. How could I not see what was happening right under my nose?" She reached across the desk, her warm hand covering mine in a comforting gesture. "You're not to blame, dear," she said firmly. "The fault lies with those who betrayed your trust." Her words struck a chord within me, and I felt a flicker of resolve ignite in my chest. She was right. I was the victim here, not the perpetrator. Greg and Lydia had made their choices, and it was time for me to make mine. "What if I can't piece it all back together, Mariana?" I asked, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "What if the damage is too deep, too irreparable?" Mariana's gaze was steady, her eyes shining with a wisdom born of experience. "Charlotte, you are stronger than you think," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Don't let them drag you down. You have the power to rise above this, to forge your own path." Her words resonated within me, igniting a flame of determination that burned away the doubt and fear that had been weighing me down. I was Charlotte Emerson, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had built a successful career and a loving family through sheer grit and resilience. And I would not let Greg and Lydia's betrayal define me. As if sensing my newfound resolve, Mariana gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Whatever you decide, know that you have my support," she said, a warm smile spreading across her face. "You are not alone in this." I returned her smile, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Mariana," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She waved a dismissive hand, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Nonsense, my dear. You'd find a way to conquer the world, with or without me." Her words ignited a spark of laughter within me, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but with allies like Mariana by my side, I knew I had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Mariana rose to leave, I felt a newfound sense of clarity wash over me. Greg had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. No more excuses, no more lies. I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful, and chart my own course forward. The facade had crumbled, and I was ready to embrace the reality that lay beneath. A reality where I, Charlotte Emerson, was the master of my own destiny. The weight of the evidence in my hands felt like a lead anchor, dragging me deeper into the murky depths of betrayal. But I knew I couldn't turn back now, not when the truth was finally within my grasp. "Charlotte, what's going on?" Margaret's voice cut through the tension, her brow furrowed with concern. "This infighting is tearing us apart." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. "Ron, Margaret, you need to know what Greg and Lydia have done." Greg's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. This was my moment, my chance to lay bare the tangled web of lies that had ensnared our family. For years, Greg has been funneling money from our joint savings to cover Lydia's debts, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of anger coursing through me. Thousands upon thousands of dollars siphoned away without my knowledge or consent. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Ron's expression hardened into a mask of stoic disapproval. "Is this true?" he demanded, his gaze boring into Greg and Lydia. Lydia, ever the master manipulator, was the first to respond. "Daddy, you know how these things can spiral out of control," she simpered, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. "I made some poor choices, but Greg was only trying to help me get back on my feet." I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Don't buy into her lies, Ron," I said, my voice laced with contempt. "She's been playing you both for fools, using Greg's misguided sense of loyalty to bleed us dry." From the corner of my eye, I saw Greg flinch, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He knew the jig was up, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the truth. "Charlotte's right," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I should have been honest from the start, but Lydia, she just kept needing more and more." Lydia's mask of innocence slipped, her eyes narrowing into slits of fury. "You spineless worm," she hissed, rounding on Greg. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" The room descended into chaos, with Margaret sobbing and Ron bellowing for order. In the midst of the pandemonium, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The storm had finally broken, and the truth lay bare before us all. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the din like a knife. "This ends now, Lydia." All eyes turned to me, and I could feel the weight of their collective gaze pressing down upon me. But I refused to falter, drawing strength from the knowledge that I held the power in my hands. "You have one chance to take responsibility for your actions," I said, my voice low and steady. "Admit to what you've done, and we can move forward as a family." Lydia's lips curled into a sneer, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Or what, Charlotte? You'll go running to the authorities like a scared little girl?" I met her gaze unflinchingly, my resolve unwavering. "Or I expose everything to our extended family and community," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "Every lie, every scheme, every penny you've bled from us, all laid bare for the world to see." A hush fell over the room, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Greg's parents looked stunned, their faces pale with shock and dismay. Lydia, however, simply laughed, a bitter, mocking sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You'll regret this, Charlotte," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "The family will never forgive you." But as I looked around the room, taking in the faces of those I loved most, I knew that I had already won. The truth was out, and Lydia's grip on our lives was slipping. "Better to be true and alone than entangled in falsehood with company," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. In that moment, I knew that the path ahead would be arduous, fraught with pain and heartbreak. But I was ready to face the consequences of my actions, ready to forge a new path forward, free from the shackles of manipulation and deceit. The showdown had begun, and I was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. Lydia's words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, her threat reverberating through the room. "You'll regret this, Charlotte. The family will never forgive you." I met her gaze unflinchingly, my resolve hardening like steel. "Better to be true and alone than entangled in falsehood with company," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. Greg's parents exchanged a troubled glance, their faces etched with conflicting emotions. I could see the struggle playing out behind their eyes, the desire to believe their children warring with the stark reality of the truth laid bare before them. Lydia, sensing their wavering loyalty, turned on the waterworks, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. "Mommy, Daddy, please," she simpered, her voice thick with false anguish. "You know, I would never intentionally hurt this family." But her manipulations fell on deaf ears. The evidence I had presented was damning, a mountain of financial records and email trails that left no room for doubt or excuses. Ron was the first to break the tense silence, his voice gruff with barely contained anger. "Enough of this nonsense," he growled, fixing Lydia with a steely glare. "Your sister-in-law has presented irrefutable proof of your misdeeds. It's time to face the consequences." Lydia's jaw dropped, her carefully cultivated mask of innocence shattering into 1,000 pieces. But But you're supposed to be on my side, she sputtered, her eyes darting between her parents in disbelief. Margaret, her face pale and drawn, reached out to grasp her husband's hand. We're on the side of truth, Lydia, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and resolve. And the truth is, you've betrayed this family's trust in the most egregious way. A hush fell over the room as the weight of Margaret's words sank in. Greg, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, seemed to shrink into himself, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But Lydia was not one to go down without a fight. This is all her doing, she spat, rounding on me with a venomous glare. She's turned you against your own flesh and blood. I opened my mouth to respond, but Mariana beat me to it, her voice ringing out like a clarion call. That's enough, Lydia, she said, her tone brooking no argument. The only person responsible for this mess is you. Mariana's unwavering support was like a balm to my soul, and I felt a surge of gratitude towards my mentor and friend. She had been by my side from the beginning, offering wisdom and guidance when I needed it most. As if sensing my renewed strength, Lydia's bravado faltered, her eyes darting towards the door. But before she could make a move, Ron stepped forward, his expression steely. You're cut off, Lydia, he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. No more handouts, no more enabling. It's time you faced the consequences of your actions. Lydia's face contorted with rage, her carefully cultivated facade crumbling into a twisted mask of fury. You'll regret this, she snarled, her eyes wild and unhinged. All of you. But her threats rang hollow, her power over the family finally broken. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end the truth had prevailed. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood by me, Mariana, Ellie, even Greg's parents, I knew that I was not alone. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Lydia's reign of terror was over, and I was ready to take control of my life once more. As the dust settled, I turned to Ellie, my heart swelling with pride at the strength and resilience she had shown throughout this ordeal. It's going to be okay, honey, I said, pulling her into a tight embrace. We're going to get through this, together. Ellie nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and admiration. I know, Mom, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You've shown me what it means to be truly strong. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the courage and determination to face them head-on. With the unwavering support of my daughter and my newfound allies, I was ready to forge a new path, one free from the shackles of manipulation and deceit. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And as I looked towards the future, I felt a sense of purpose and resolve that I hadn't felt in years. It was time to take control of my destiny, once and for all. The silence that followed Lydia's dramatic exit was deafening, the weight of her actions hanging heavy in the air. But as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood by me, Mariana, Ellie, even Greg's parents, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a newfound sense of peace and resolve had taken root. Mom? Ellie's voice broke the stillness, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and admiration. I'm so proud of you. You've shown me what it means to be truly strong. Her words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a surge of emotion welling up in my chest. Through all the turmoil and heartbreak, Ellie had been my constant, a beacon of love and support that had guided me through the darkest of times. Ellie, I said, pulling her into a tight embrace. Anything I do for us. Love is our true wealth, and as long as we have that, we'll be okay. She nodded, her arms tightening around me. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as a united front. A soft cough drew my attention back to the others in the room, and I turned to see Greg hovering uncertainly in the doorway. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and for a fleeting moment I felt a pang of pity for the man I had once loved. Char, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I've made mistakes, unforgivable mistakes, but please, let me try to make things right. I studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the weight of his betrayal. Part of me yearned for the easy path, the chance to salvage what was left of our marriage and move on with our lives. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew that it was too late for reconciliation. The trust had been shattered, the foundation of our relationship irreparably damaged by his lies and deceit. "I'm sorry, Greg," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of emotion coursing through me. "But it's too late for apologies. You made your choice when you chose to stand by Lydia, even after everything she put us through." He flinched as if I had struck him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Please, Char," he pleaded, taking a step towards me. "I'll do anything, just give me another chance." But I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "No, Greg," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "It's over. I can't keep living in the shadow of your lies, constantly wondering when the next betrayal will come." Ellie shifted beside me, her hand finding mine and giving it a gentle squeeze. Her silent support was all the strength I needed to forge ahead, to sever the ties that had bound me to a life of manipulation and deceit. "It's time for me to take control of my life," I said, my gaze sweeping over Greg and his parents, who had remained silent witnesses to our exchange. "I'm done being a victim. It's done being taken for granted and underappreciated." Greg opened his mouth as if to protest, but I cut him off with a shake of my head. "This is my moment, Greg," I said, my voice laced with a newfound sense of determination. "My chance to forge a new path, one free from the shackles of your sister's toxic influence." A flicker of resignation passed over his features, and he nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." I said nothing, my silence speaking volumes. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when the wounds of his betrayal were still so raw and fresh. As Greg turned and left, his footsteps echoing hollowly in the stillness, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a newfound sense of clarity had taken root. It was time to start building a new chapter, one brick at a time. With Ellie by my side and the unwavering support of my newfound allies, I knew that I had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road would be long and arduous, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a beacon of light cutting through the darkness that had threatened to consume me. As I looked around at the familiar surroundings of my home, I felt a sense of purpose and determination wash over me. This was my sanctuary, my safe haven, and I was ready to reclaim it as my own. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And as I turned to face the future, I knew that I would emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. It was time to take control of my destiny, once and for all. The gentle hum of conversation and laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the tumultuous events that had preceded this moment. As I surveyed the crowd gathered for the community celebration, I couldn't help but marvel at the transformation that had taken place, not just in my own life, but in the lives of those around me. "Look at you now, Charlotte." Mariana's voice broke through my reverie, her warm smile a familiar comfort. "You've come such a long way." I returned her smile, feeling a swell of gratitude for the unwavering support she had shown me throughout this journey. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mariana," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were there for me when I needed it most." She waved a dismissive hand, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Nonsense, my dear. You had the strength within you all along. I merely helped you see it." As I looked around at the familiar faces mingling and chatting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. These were the people who had stood by me, offering their support and encouragement when the world seemed to be crumbling around me. "Mom?" Ellie's voice drew my attention, and I turned to see her beaming at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and affection. "We're going to be just fine, aren't we?" I pulled her into a tight embrace, savoring the moment of connection with my daughter, the one constant in a world that had been turned upside down. "Yes, honey," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be more than fine." As I held her close, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this point. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle to reclaim control of my life. It had all been worth it, if only to reach this moment of clarity and peace. "Charlotte!" a voice called out, and I turned to see Margaret and Ron making their way towards us, their faces etched with genuine warmth and affection. "We're so proud of you, dear," Margaret said, pulling me into a gentle embrace. "You've shown such strength and resilience through all of this." Ron nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and regret. "We should have seen the truth sooner," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But you never gave up, and for that, you have our eternal gratitude." I felt a lump form in my throat, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from these two people who had once been so deeply entangled in Lydia's web of deceit. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means more than you know." As the evening wore on, I found myself surrounded by a network of allies and supporters, colleagues, friends, and even members of the community who had rallied behind me in my darkest hour. Their words of encouragement and admiration buoyed my spirits, reminding me of the incredible journey I had undertaken and the obstacles I had overcome. And through it all, Ellie remained by my side, a constant source of strength and inspiration. Her unwavering belief in me had been the fuel that kept me going, even when the path ahead seemed shrouded in darkness. As the celebration drew to a close, I found myself standing on the periphery, watching as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed. A sense of peace washed over me, a feeling of contentment and closure that I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt truly ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. With the support of my newfound allies and the love of my daughter, I knew that I had the strength and resilience to forge a new path, one built on the foundations of truth, integrity, and self-worth. As I turned to leave, Mariana's words echoed in my mind. "Look at you now, Charlotte. You've come such a long way." And in that moment, I knew that she was right. I had come a long way, further than I could have ever imagined. But the journey was far from over, and with each step forward, I felt a newfound sense of purpose and determination. The echoes of betrayal had faded, replaced by the resounding chorus of hope and possibility. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that the best was yet to come. The drawer creaked as I pulled it open, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't be snooping through Leonard's things, but something had been off lately. His distant behavior, the hushed phone calls, the late nights at the office. I needed answers. My fingers brushed against a stack of papers, and I pulled them out. A letter addressed to Leonard caught my eye. I unfolded it with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the words, my breath caught in my throat as the truth unraveled before me. Leonard had a hidden life, a secret that shattered the very foundation of our 20-year marriage. "What the hell are you doing?" Leonard's voice boomed from behind me, causing me to jump. I spun around, the letter still clutched in my hand. "How dare you snoop through my things?" he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "If you step out of line, I'll make sure you lose everything." I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Leonard, what is this? Who is this woman?" He snatched the letter from my hand, his eyes blazing. "It's none of your damn business, Carolyn. You have no right to question me." Tears stung my eyes as I watched him storm out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I sank onto the bed, my world crumbling around me. How could this be happening? We had just retired, ready to enjoy our golden years together. I had been so excited to become a grandmother, to spend more time with our family. But now everything felt like a lie. Leonard's distant behavior, his mother Evelyn's constant criticism of my homemaking and child-rearing abilities. It all made sense now. They had been hiding something from me, and I was determined to uncover the truth. I wiped my tears away, a newfound determination rising within me. I couldn't let them control me any longer. I had to fight for my family, for the future I had always dreamed of. The next morning, Evelyn arrived for her daily visit, her sharp eyes scanning the house for any imperfections. "Carolyn, dear, you really should dust more often," she tutted, running a finger along the mantelpiece. "And what's this? I hear about Leonard being upset with you." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. "Evelyn, I appreciate your concern, but this is between me and Leonard." She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "You forget your place, Carolyn. Leonard is my son, and I will always stand by him. If you can't fulfill your duties as a wife, then perhaps you don't deserve to be part of this family." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. I had spent too many years bowing to her every whim, trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, but no more. I think it's time for you to leave, Evelyn, I said firmly, holding the door open for her. I have a lot to think about, and I need some space. She huffed, grabbing her purse and storming out of the house. I closed the door behind her, leaning against it for support. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to fight for what was right. As I stood there, my mind racing with possibilities, I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Thomas, Leonard's father, standing on the porch. He gave me a sympathetic smile, his eyes filled with understanding. "Carolyn, I couldn't help but overhear what happened with Evelyn," he said gently. "I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to go through this alone." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I stepped aside to let him in. Perhaps I had found an unexpected ally in this battle, someone who could help me navigate the treacherous waters ahead. The days following my discovery of Leonard's secret were a blur of emotions. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, wondering what other lies he had been hiding from me. But I couldn't let my guard down, not with Evelyn's daily visits and her constant criticism. "Carolyn, dear, you really should dust more often," she said, running her finger along the mantelpiece. "And what's this I hear about Leonard being upset with you?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. "Evelyn, I appreciate your concern, but this is between me and Leonard," she scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "You forget your place, Carolyn. Leonard is my son, and I will always stand by him. If you can't fulfill your duties as a wife, then perhaps you don't deserve to be part of this family." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. I had spent too many years bowing to her every whim, trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, but no more. "I think it's time for you to leave, Evelyn," I said firmly, holding the door open for her. "I have a lot to think about, and I need some space." She huffed, grabbing her purse and storming out of the house. I closed the door behind her, leaning against it for support. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to fight for what was right. That night, Leonard came home late, as usual. I was waiting for him in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to confront him about the letter, but I was terrified of what he might say. "Leonard, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "What is it now, Carolyn?" "I've had a long day, and I don't have time for your nonsense." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I found the letter, Leonard. I know about your secret life, about the other woman." His face contorted with rage, and he slammed his fist on the table. "How dare you accuse me of such things? I've given you everything, Carolyn. A home, a family, a life of comfort, and this is how you repay me? By snooping through my things and making wild accusations?" I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated by his anger. "I'm not making accusations, Leonard. I saw the letter with my own eyes. I know the truth." He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "The truth? You wouldn't know the truth if it slapped you in the face, Carolyn. You're just a naive little housewife who's in way over her head." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined not to let him see me cry. "I may be a housewife, Leonard, but I'm not naive. I know what I saw, and I won't let you gaslight me into believing otherwise." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "Listen carefully, Carolyn. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you lose everything. The house, the money, the family. I'll take it all away from you, and you'll be left with nothing. Do you understand?" I nodded, my heart sinking in my chest. I knew he meant every word, and I couldn't risk losing everything I had worked so hard for. But I also knew that I couldn't live like this anymore, trapped in a marriage built on lies and deceit. As Leonard stormed out of the room, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of his threats and Evelyn's constant criticism. I needed to find a way out, a way to break free from this toxic cycle. But how could I do that when everyone seemed to be against me? When my own husband and mother-in-law were determined to keep me in my place, to make me feel small and insignificant? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I had to keep fighting. For myself, for my family, for the life I deserved. And I wouldn't stop until I found a way to make that happen. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of Leonard's threats still lingering in my mind. I knew I couldn't face another day of Evelyn's criticism and Leonard's cold indifference, so I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I stepped outside, I noticed Thomas, Leonard's father, tending to the garden. He looked up and smiled, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good morning, Carolyn. How are you holding up?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden him with my troubles, but something about his gentle demeanor made me feel safe. "I've been better, Thomas. It's been a tough few days." He nodded, setting down his gardening tools and gesturing for me to sit beside him on the bench. "I can only imagine. I've seen the strain you've been under, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Tears welled up in my eyes at his words, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Thomas. That means more to me than you know." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the birds flit from tree to tree. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice soft and contemplative. "You know, Carolyn, I've been married to Evelyn for over 50 years, and it hasn't always been easy. She can be a handful, to say the least." I couldn't help but chuckle at his understatement. "That's putting it mildly." He smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I know, but I've learned a thing or two about dealing with her over the years. The key is to stand your ground, to not let her push you around. She may be stubborn, but so are you." I nodded, feeling a newfound sense of strength and determination. "You're right, Thomas. I can't let her control me anymore. I need to fight for what I believe in, for what I know is right." He patted my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "And I'll be right there beside you every step of the way. You're not alone in this, Carolyn." We spent the rest of the morning together, talking and laughing as Thomas shared stories of his own tumultuous past with Evelyn. It was a side of him I had never seen before, and I found myself growing more and more fond of him with each passing minute. As the sun began to climb higher in the sky, Thomas stood up, stretching his arms above his head. "Well, I suppose I should get back to my gardening. These flowers won't plant themselves." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in days. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." He winked, his smile warm and genuine. "Anytime, Carolyn, and remember, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." With that, he picked up his tools and set to work, whistling a cheerful tune as he went. I watched him for a moment, feeling a sense of gratitude and affection wash over me. In the midst of all the chaos and heartbreak, I had found an unexpected ally, a friend who believed in me and supported me unconditionally. But as I turned to head back inside, I saw Evelyn standing in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed and her lips pursed. "What were you doing out there with Thomas?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. I felt my newfound confidence waver for a moment, but then I remembered Thomas's words. I couldn't let her push me around anymore. I had to stand my ground. "We were just talking, Evelyn. There's no need to get upset," she scoffed, her face twisting into a scowl. "Talking? More like conspiring against me, I'm sure. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Thomas, haven't you?" I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger and frustration rise up within me. "That's not true, Evelyn. I have no reason to be jealous of you. I'm just trying to find some peace and support during a difficult time, and Thomas has been kind enough to offer that to me." She opened her mouth to retort, but I held up my hand, cutting her off. "I'm done listening to your accusations and criticisms, Evelyn. From now on, I'm going to do what's best for me and my family, whether you like it or not." With that, I brushed past her and headed inside, my heart racing, but my head held high. I knew there would be more battles to come, but for now, I had won a small victory. And with Thomas by my side, I felt like I could face anything. The confrontation with Evelyn left me shaken, but I refused to let it dampen my spirits. I had Thomas's support, and that was enough to keep me going. I spent the next few days focusing on my own well-being, taking long walks in the park and reading my favorite books, but my newfound peace was short-lived. One afternoon, while cleaning out Leonard's study, I stumbled upon an envelope hidden in the back of his desk drawer. My heart raced as I pulled it out, my hands trembling with anticipation. Inside, I found a stack of photographs and letters. The photos showed Leonard with a younger woman, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces beaming with happiness. The letters were even more damning, revealing a long-term affair that had been going on for years. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. How could Leonard do this to me, to our family? I had given him everything, sacrificed my own dreams and desires to be the perfect wife and mother. And this was how he repaid me? I confronted Leonard that night, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. How could you do this, Leonard? How could you throw away everything we've built together for some cheap fling? He looked at me with cold, unfeeling eyes. You're one to talk, Carolyn. You haven't been fulfilling your wifely duties for years. What did you expect me to do, just sit around and wait for you to come to your senses? I recoiled as if he had slapped me. Wifely duties? Is that all I am to you, Leonard? A servant, a plaything to be used and discarded at your whim? He sneered, his face twisting with contempt. You're lucky I've put up with you for this long, Carolyn. Most men would have left you years ago. I felt a surge of rage course through my veins. Get out, Leonard. Get out of my house, and don't come back. He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. Your house? You forget, Carolyn. Everything here belongs to me. The house, the money, the family. Without me, you're nothing. I stood my ground, my voice steady and resolute. I may be nothing to you, Leonard, but I'm everything to our children and grandchildren, and I won't let you destroy this family any longer. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with sobs. How had it come to this? How had the man I once loved turned into such a monster? I spent the next few hours going through the letters and photographs, my heart breaking with each new revelation. Leonard had been carrying on this affair for years, sneaking off to meet his mistress whenever he had the chance. He had even bought her expensive gifts and taken her on lavish vacations, all while I was at home, struggling to keep our family together. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to turn. Evelyn would never believe me, and Leonard had made it clear that he would stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden. As I sat there, lost in thought, the phone rang. It was Thomas, his voice filled with concern. Carolyn, are you all right? I heard shouting coming from your house earlier. I broke down, pouring out the whole sordid story. Thomas listened patiently, his voice calm and reassuring. Carolyn, you need to get out of there. Come stay with me for a while until we can figure out what to do next. I hesitated, not wanting to impose on him, but the thought of staying in that house, with all its painful memories and secrets, was too much to bear. Thank you, Thomas. I'll be over in a few minutes. I packed a small bag and headed out the door, my heart heavy but my mind clear. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with Thomas by my side, I felt like I could face anything. And I was determined to make Leonard pay for what he had done, no matter what it took. Staying with Thomas was a breath of fresh air. His home was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive atmosphere I had grown accustomed to. Thomas was a gracious host, always making sure I had everything I needed and offering a listening ear whenever I needed to talk. Over the next few days, I gathered all the evidence I had of Leonard's affair, including the photographs and letters I had found. I reached out to friends and family, telling them the truth about what had been going on behind closed doors. To my surprise, many of them had suspected something was amiss for years, but had been too afraid to say anything. With their support and encouragement, I made the difficult decision to leave Leonard for good. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't continue to live a lie. I had to do what was best for myself and my family. I called my sister Diane, who lived nearby, and asked if I could stay with her for a while. She didn't hesitate for a second, insisting that I come over right away. Bring Oliver too, she said. He needs his grandmother now more than ever. I packed a few bags and picked up Oliver from school, my heart heavy but my mind clear. As we drove to Diane's house, I explained to Oliver that we would be staying with Aunt Diane for a while, until things settled down at home. He seemed confused but didn't ask too many questions, for which I was grateful. Diane welcomed us with open arms, her house a haven of peace and tranquility. She had always been the level-headed one in the family, the one who could see things clearly and offer practical advice. I knew I could count on her to help me through this difficult time. A few days later, I invited Leonard and Evelyn over to Diane's house, along with a few other close family members. I had something important to tell them, and I wanted to do it in person. When they arrived, Leonard looked annoyed and impatient, while Evelyn seemed suspicious and on edge. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice steady and clear. "I know about the affair, Leonard," I said, holding up the photographs and letters. "I know about Anne, and I know how long this has been going on." Leonard's face turned white, while Evelyn gasped in shock. "What are you talking about, Carolyn?" she demanded. "This is absurd." I shook my head, my eyes never leaving Leonard's face. "It's the truth, Evelyn, and I have proof. Leonard has been lying to us for years, and I won't stand for it any longer." Leonard's face contorted with rage, and he lunged towards me, his hands outstretched. "You stupid, ungrateful bitch!" he snarled. "How dare you do this to me, after everything I've done for you?" But before he could reach me, Thomas stepped in front of him, his eyes blazing with anger. "That's enough, Leonard," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will not lay a hand on Carolyn, not now, not ever." Leonard stepped back, his face twisted with hatred and disgust. "You're all against me," he spat. "My own family, turning on me like a pack of wolves." I stood my ground, my head held high. "We're not against you, Leonard. We're against the lies and the deceit. We're against the way you've treated me and this family for years, and we won't stand for it any longer." Evelyn looked stunned, her eyes darting back and forth between Leonard and me. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the realization that perhaps her precious son wasn't as perfect as she had always believed. "I'm leaving, Leonard," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I'm taking Oliver, and we're starting a new life, away from you and your toxic behavior, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my head held high, and my heart filled with a newfound sense of strength and determination. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive and in control of my own destiny. News of my confrontation with Leonard and Evelyn spread like wildfire through our small town. Everywhere I went, I could feel the eyes of the community on me, some filled with pity, others with a newfound respect. It was as if they had always known that something was amiss in our family, but had been too polite to say anything. Leonard, on the other hand, was facing a very different kind of attention. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and he was met with cold stares and turned backs at every turn. His once thriving business began to suffer as clients pulled away, unwilling to be associated with a man who had betrayed his wife so publicly. I watched from a distance as Leonard struggled to maintain his composure, his carefully crafted facade crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction in seeing him suffer, but another part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. After all, he was still the father of my children, and I had once loved him deeply. Evelyn, surprisingly, took a different approach. She began to reach out to me, inviting me to tea and offering to help with Oliver. At first, I was suspicious of her motives, wondering if she was simply trying to save face in the wake of the scandal. But as time went on, I began to see a different side of her, one that was more vulnerable and genuine than I had ever seen before. "Carolyn, I know I haven't always been the easiest person to get along with," she said one afternoon as we sat in her living room. "But I want you to know that I deeply regret the way I've treated you over the years. I was so focused on protecting Leonard that I failed to see the pain he was causing you." I was taken aback by her words, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said finally. "That means a lot to me." She reached out and took my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be there for you and Oliver in any way I can. Please, let me help you." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. As the weeks went by, I found myself growing stronger and more independent. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping other women who had been through similar experiences. It was a way for me to give back to the community that had supported me through my darkest times, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I had been missing for so long. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I ran into Anne, Leonard's former mistress. She looked tired and worn, her eyes filled with a deep sadness that I recognized all too well. "Carolyn, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you or your family. I didn't know Leonard was married when we first started seeing each other, and by the time I found out, it was too late. I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of kinship. We were both victims of Leonard's lies and deceit, and we had both suffered greatly because of it. "I forgive you, Anne," I said, my voice steady and clear. "We were both fooled by Leonard, and we both deserve better than what he gave us." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Carolyn. That means more to me than you know." As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced my demons and come out stronger on the other side. I knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them head-on, with the support of my family and friends by my side. And as for Leonard, well, he would have to face the consequences of his actions, just as I had. But for now, I was focused on building a new life for myself and Oliver, one that was filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. Just when I thought I had uncovered all the secrets in my family, Thomas dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. We were sitting in his living room, enjoying a quiet cup of tea, when he suddenly cleared his throat and looked at me with a serious expression. "Carolyn, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's about Evelyn, and why she's been so hard on you all these years." I set my cup down, my heart racing with anticipation. "What is it, Thomas? What do you know?" He sighed, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Many years ago, when Leonard was just a boy, Evelyn had an affair. It nearly destroyed our marriage, and it's haunted her ever since." I gasped, my mind spinning with the implications of his words. Evelyn, the woman who had always been so quick to judge me, had been hiding her own infidelity all along. "She's been projecting her own guilt onto you, Carolyn," Thomas continued. "She sees herself in you, and it terrifies her. That's why she's been so overbearing, so critical of your every move." I sat back in my chair, stunned by the revelation. Suddenly, everything made sense. Evelyn's constant meddling, her unwavering support of Leonard, even in the face of his own betrayal. She had been trying to atone for her own sins, and I had been caught in the crossfire. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront Evelyn, to force her to face the truth about herself and the damage she had caused. I thanked Thomas for his honesty and set off for Evelyn's house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. When I arrived, Evelyn was sitting in her living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me, her face etched with guilt and shame. "I know why you're here, Carolyn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas told you about my affair, didn't he?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Why, Evelyn? Why did you do it? And why did you take it out on me all these years?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was young and foolish, Carolyn. I made a mistake, and I've been paying for it ever since. When I saw you so happy and in love with Leonard, it reminded me of everything I had lost. I couldn't bear it." I felt a wave of empathy wash over me, mixed with a deep sense of anger and betrayal. "But why protect Leonard, Evelyn? Why enable his own infidelity when you knew firsthand how much it could hurt?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for forgiveness. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Carolyn. I thought I was protecting my family, just like I had tried to do all those years ago. But I see now that I was wrong. I was only hurting you and myself in the process." I sat down beside her, my heart heavy with the weight of her confession. "I forgive you, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I need you to do something for me. I need you to be honest with yourself and with our family. No more secrets, no more lies. We deserve better than that." She nodded, her face a mask of relief and gratitude. "I promise, Carolyn. From now on, I'll do everything in my power to make things right, starting with being there for you and Oliver, in whatever way you need me." I hugged her then, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. The secrets that had haunted our family for so long were finally out in the open, and we could begin to heal. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew that with the support of my loved ones, I could face anything. As I left Evelyn's house that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. I had uncovered the truth, and in doing so, I had taken back control of my own life. And I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with my head held high and my heart full of hope for the future. In the weeks following my confrontation with Evelyn, I watched as Leonard's world crumbled around him. His once thriving business had all but collapsed, and his reputation in the community was in tatters. Everywhere he went, he was met with cold stares and whispered accusations, the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. I knew I should have felt a sense of satisfaction, seeing him suffer the consequences of his betrayal, but instead I felt a deep sense of sadness and regret. Despite everything he had done, Leonard was still the father of my children, and a part of me would always love him. One evening, as I sat in Diane's living room, watching Oliver play with his toys, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Leonard standing there, his face haggard and his eyes filled with despair. "Carolyn, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. We sat down at the kitchen table, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. "I'm leaving town," Leonard said finally, his eyes fixed on the table. "I've lost everything, my business, my reputation, my family. There's nothing left for me here." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness wash over me. "I understand, Leonard. I think it's for the best." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a deep regret. "I'm sorry, Carolyn, for everything. I know I can never make it right, but I want you to know that I truly am sorry." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined to stay strong. "I know, Leonard, but sometimes sorry isn't enough." He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know. I just hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." With that, he stood up and walked out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew that forgiveness would come in time, but for now, I had to focus on rebuilding my life and creating a better future for myself and Oliver. A few days later, I found the perfect little cottage just a few blocks away from Diane's house. It was small and cozy, with a little garden out back where Oliver could play. As I signed the lease and started packing up my things, I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation wash over me. This was a new beginning, a chance to start fresh and create the life I had always dreamed of. Evelyn and Thomas were there to help me move in, their faces filled with a newfound warmth and affection. Evelyn had been true to her word, making a genuine effort to be more supportive and understanding. She even offered to watch Oliver while I unpacked, giving me a much-needed break. As I sat in my new living room, surrounded by boxes and the smell of fresh paint, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had been through so much in the past few months, the betrayal, the anger, the pain, but I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. I knew that there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But I also knew that I had the love and support of my family and the strength within myself to overcome anything that came my way. As the sun began to set outside my window, casting a warm glow over the room, I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in years. This was my new beginning, my chance to create the life I had always wanted, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.